So hello, good day, and welcome everyone to the DOSI 10-year anniversary webinar series. My name is Christopher Barrio-Frojan, and I'm the DOSI Programme Officer, your host for today's webinar. This webinar is the second in the series, and we're delighted to bring to you some leading voices on the topic of the new treaty for biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, namely Marcel Jaspars from the University of Aberdeen, and Vanessa Lopes, Mariana Caldeira, and Christine Gaebel from the University of Edinburgh. After their presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask questions by typing them into the chat facility on your screen. So please hang around until the end of the webinar, and I will endeavour to read out as many questions as possible. This webinar is being recorded for future dissemination. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to today's presenters, and hopefully I'll see you again shortly when they have finished. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Chris, and thank you everyone for joining. So I hope that you can see that. So welcome to DOSI's second webinar in our 10-year anniversary webinar series. As Chris said, today we're going to take a deep dive into the world of marine biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, or BBNJ, and the newly adopted BBNJ agreement. So our aim for this webinar is to provide unique insights from members across the DOSI community who are deeply engaged in the process, and to provide you more information around opportunities for deep sea science that emerge from this historic agreement. So I'll start off today by providing some background to the BBNJ process, the history, the current status, and the next steps, and discuss a little bit about why science and knowledge is so important for the success of the BBNJ agreement. As Chris said, I'll then pass over to my colleagues, Professor Marcel Jaspars, who will dive deeper into marine genetic resources and the opportunities that arise for science and scientists from the BBNJ agreement. I'll then pass over to Mariana Caldeira, who will share insights around enhancing voice and participation through the BBNJ agreement. And then we'll close off with insights from Vanessa Lopes, who's going to discuss reflections from BBNJ process. And after that, we'll move over to hear from you for some Q&A. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of the BBNJ agreement, I'll start off with a quick introduction for those of you who aren't familiar with the process. So what do we mean by areas beyond national jurisdiction? First, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, sets out different maritime zones, each with different rules, obligations, and freedoms. For today's webinar, what's important is that some of these zones are within national jurisdiction, therefore subject to varying levels of control by coastal states, but other zones are beyond the boundaries of any one nation. So this includes the area, which refers to the seabed and the subsoil outside of coastal state jurisdiction, as well as the high seas, and this is the water column outside of national jurisdiction. So when we put this on a map, you can see that areas beyond national jurisdiction comprise the majority of our global ocean. Despite this, the governance in these areas has been criticized as being fragmented and insufficient, with no overarching framework for the overall conservation and sustainable use of these ecosystems. In response to this gap, the global community came together to develop the new international agreement pertaining to the conservation and sustainable use of BBNJ. So this hasn't been a quick or easy process. It officially kicked off in 2004 with the establishment of an ad hoc, open-ended informal working group, which was tasked with investigating the key issues that could be covered by such an agreement. This was followed by the establishment of a preparatory committee, which was tasked with further identifying the scope. And then finally, 14 years later, official negotiations commenced. So they took place over 6 years before the final text was agreed upon by states. This was followed by the BBNJ agreement being formally adopted this past summer and opening for signature shortly after. So what does this mean for BBNJ? Well, it's important to note that signature is different than ratification, with signatures more implying merely showing support instead of being consenting to being bound by the agreement. But in the short time that the agreement has been open for signature, there has been overwhelming support. So to date, there's been 84 signatures, 83 states plus the European Union, And you can see here that there is a wide spread of countries that have signed the agreement. And what you can't quite see here because of the size of my map is that this includes 22 small island developing states. This also includes 9 landlocked states. And so you can see that there's broad support for the BBNJ agreement already. So what does the agreement cover? Well, it covers 4 key elements. First, marine genetic resources, or MGRs, and this includes rules around accessing these resources and the equitable sharing of benefits derived from them, something that Marcel will delve into deeper in his talk. Next is area-based management tools, or ABMTs, and this also includes MPAs and allows for the establishment of MPAs and other area-based management tools in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So proposals for ABMTs will be submitted by states, reviewed by the scientific and technical body, and ultimately decided by the Conference of Parties. Environmental impact assessments, or EIAs. So this is going to establish requirements and processes for conducting assessments of impacts from activities that take place in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And last but definitely not least, capacity building and transfer of marine technology. And this aims to ensure equitable and global participation in the agreement. And then, of course, cross-cutting all of these 4, we have some key elements which are institutional arrangements. This includes the establishment of bodies such as the scientific and technical body, amongst others. But also cross-cutting all 4 parts is the need and use of science and other knowledge. So indeed, one thing that makes the BBNJ agreement so interesting, especially for the scientific community, is the importance that it places on science. So under the guiding principles and approaches, the BBNJ agreement explicitly calls for the use of best available science and scientific information, as well as traditional knowledge from Indigenous peoples and local communities. Indeed, this process has been touted as a science-led process since the beginning. So science and knowledge identified the need for the agreement, especially through global processes such as the World Ocean Assessment, which demonstrated the state of deep sea ecosystems and the gaps that needed to be filled. Science and knowledge then played an important role through the negotiations with expert groups such as the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative and others, attending the negotiations, liaising with state delegations, and sharing the best available science, as well as scientists being part of those state delegations. And of course, the role for science doesn't stop there. So the need for science and knowledge will only increase with the entry into force. So there's some areas under the agreement where there's some clear opportunities for science and scientists to play an important role, such as undertaking the science needed for environmental impact assessments, or for identifying and designating areas in need of further protection. So science and knowledge has played an important role in the BBNJ process thus far, but the real work is still to come. And I hope that we're able to tease this out in the next presentations from my colleagues. So with that, I will pass on to Marcel, who's going to give you a deeper dive into one of the more scientifically technical elements of the agreement, which is marine genetic resources.
Hi, hello everyone, welcome. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the MGR and the BBNJ treaty, especially those aspects that may affect practicing deep sea scientists the most. Next slide, please. So the kind of work that I do, the kind of work that's covered by the MGR part of the treaty, is that the idea of bioprospecting or biodiscovery. And the idea is that you take a deep sea resource. It could be a whole organism such as a sponge or something like that, or it could be a sediment sample from which you might grow a bacterium. And from that, from those biological samples, you might obtain either the DNA and sequence it, or you might obtain direct chemical extracts that might be useful for activity generated in biological screens, such as testing against diseases or other tests that might show interesting properties, such as, for instance, enzymes derived from the digital sequence information. And it may then take some time, and you might develop a product, and that product might generate a benefit and those benefits should be shared, which is essentially what this part of the treaty is about. Next slide, please. So here's some examples of non-BBNJ MGR products. And they're basically fall into several categories. So some of them might be, for instance, drugs. So the one on the top left is a potent anti-cancer drug for a disease called soft tissue sarcoma. And it's generated not by harvesting the original resource, but it's made using a synthetic or semi-synthetic process by a Spanish company called PharmaMar. Other ideas might be, for instance, the concept of using total chemical synthesis to make pain drugs, such as Prialt in the bottom left corner. And you might be familiar with some of these things on the right-hand side, the non-pharmaceutical products. The one top left, the Vent polymerase, is the most high-fidelity DNA copying enzyme that exists, and it actually comes from a hot vent outside of Naples. Fuelzyme is one that may or may not have come from an area beyond national jurisdiction. I can't find out the facts there. It's an enzyme that might be used in a generation of biofuels. Then there's a cosmetic top right corner. This is a compound that might be important against wrinkle formation. And then finally at the bottom we have the brominated furananes from an Australian seaweed, essentially, that might be useful in preventing the formation of biofilms in medical products such as stents and the kind of, what do you call it, catheters. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about how samples and data should be treated under the BBNJ treaty. Next slide, please. So we put this together. We put this particular image together. This is for a book that we're writing on the MGR part of the treaty. This led by Fran Humphreys in Australia. And this is really the elements of that Article 12, which is the notification article. And the indication is that at the very beginning, before you even start your cruise, you would notify the clearinghouse mechanism about what you're about to do and its nature and objectives, subject matter of the research, geographical areas, methods, etc. That information would be provided to the clearinghouse mechanism, which would provide you back with something called a BBNJ standardized batch identifier, which applies, in my mind, to the whole cruise itself. So every sample that comes from that cruise will be labeled with with that particular number as a minimum. If there's a change between the notification 6 months ahead of the cruise and the actual cruise setting sail, you will need to re-notify the clearinghouse of the change. And it might be that you've changed location or for certain reasons changing what you're doing because of equipment availability. The expectation is that then after the cruise, you would fill in a post-cruise notification, and that would give information on where the data might be stored, where the samples might be stored. You should give a cruise report, and you might give a update to a data management plan as well. And that should all be linked to the identifier that we mentioned before. And then after that point, sometime after that, it's not specified exactly when, I think it's been 2 and 3 years or so, you would have to report to the Benefit Sharing Committee, which has been formed to give an aggregate report on access to the MGR and the digital sequence information linked to the number. So basically, it's not a report by sample, but it's a report by the fact that a particular 100 samples from MGRs were recorded in that particular collection. And that's essentially information that they want, as far as I can tell. In terms of utilization, if you have the good luck to have a publication come out of it, a patent come out of it, or a product, you would need to provide that information back as well to the clearinghouse mechanism. And so it's important that at the bottom it says obligations, is that the database records and sample deposits can be identified as arising from the BBNJ. So again, that's the key thing that they want, is to be able to connect everything together. Next slide, please. So what happens now? So is it really very different from what we fill in the cruise report? So I've got a rough log here from Southampton, from the National Oceanography Centre, and it shows essentially there's a cruise idea. There's a James Cook here, and it gives you a number. It gives you the gear that was used, it gives you the depth that was used, it gives you the coordinates that was used, and maybe a site ID as well. So this is already more information that the treaty is actually requiring. Next slide, please. So current practice is often a spreadsheet which contains information about the cruise ID, which is in this case just PD, Pharmadeep, the gear used, the site and the station, and then a sample ID. Again, all that is required for the treaty at the moment is that the batch identifier is not at the level of an individual sample. It is a tag, essentially. It says that this material was collected from BBNJ. Next slide, please. And it might be something as simple as this. So this is a record of one of our samples that we obtained from the British Oceanographic Core Facility, and we grew bacteria from this, and then we sequenced it and put it into NCBI database. What you can see here is the cruise identifier has actually been tagged alongside the sample data, showing that that material came from that particular cruise. It can be traced back to its origin if you need to do that. Again, this is really, I think the key to this is that it allows us to say how many samples came from a particular part of the world. So in this case, the area of national jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So I spoke to some colleagues who are in ocean science, and really their opinion was very much that the requirements are sensible and good, and 80% of these things we try to do anyway. 20% we don't, but should. And it's a huge positive step to see these aspirations written down and agreed upon. And it points out the reality of what's happening at the bottom of the sea, and the volume of data and information is immense. But having that list of cruises, the location, the chief scientist, and a few other fields will be hugely useful, and a massive undertaking on its own. And the idea behind that original list of cruises is that other scientists from around the world know that this is going on, and you can have better coordination of science. You can have other scientists join the cruise when space allows. And again, that's the idea of the capacity development part of the treaty as well. However, any mechanism to do this would need some larger resources generated for this. A lot of agencies struggle already with the volume of data, even from a small number of ships. And much of the data collected to date won't actually meet that requirement that's in the treaty. And the realization is that a lot of cruise projects finish when the cruise finishes, or maybe 1 or 2 years post-cruise, meaning that additional resources need to be made available for people to be able to comply with the treaty agreement. Can I have the next slide, please? But what's good for us? I mean, the whole idea of this notification before the cruise is that the clearinghouse mechanism provides a standardized batch identifier. It should allow better cooperation coordination. We should know who's doing what, where, and when. We should be able to cooperate with other scientists around the world on joining cruises and coordinate as well, that we don't all overlap and go to the same parts of the world. The obligation to make data available should lead to less overlapping science and better global coverage. And this reporting on use of samples and data should mean, if we have good data standards, to have more coherent and consistent data. It's actually quite useful for science to have that. And then the other good thing that I noted from the treaty is that the benefits based on the payments into a fund are based on the use of MGR. And again, it's not entirely clear how the second part of that will happen, but there will be money up front. There'll be money right away in the fund to be able to carry out other parts of the treaty objectives. And the benefits are directly linked to conservation and sustainable use, compared to the Nagoya Protocol, where that's not the case. This is a direct linkage between that. And there will be a benefit sharing committee, and it should be really representative of people around the world, with members included from different backgrounds, different career stages, and other characteristics. So I'm hoping that that feeds in nicely to Mariana and Vanessa's presentations. Thank you very much.
Hello to all, my name is Mariana. I'm a biologist from Brazil, and I'm also a fellow with the Nippon Foundation Ocean Voices program. I had the incredible opportunity to closely follow the negotiations of the BBNJ agreement as part of DOSI delegation, and observing how international decisions are made underscored the power that collective determination from countries holds in bringing the changes we want to see for the ocean now and in the future. I believe that now that we have an agreement, it is fundamental to create space for diverse sectors, voices, and engage stakeholders in the implementation phase, giving them space to actively participate in the decision-making processes. We also need a broader representation of groups, including groups from different countries, especially those from least developing countries, SEEDs expressing their concerns and also their contribution to better manage marine resources and biodiversity. A collaborative and supportive environment with ongoing conversations with representatives of states offers the potential of having different perspectives with innovative solutions to well-known issues, fostering a holistic approach to ocean conservation. Building a supportive and inclusive environment requires efforts, especially now in the implementation phase. And it's important to bring professionals from different backgrounds, such as lawyers, biologists, oceanographers, social scientists, and engage them in an ongoing dialogue. By bringing these different perspectives, there is an opportunity to address the complexities of existing issues comprehensively. We must all need to focus on enabling a diverse environment where researchers, the civil society, indigenous representatives, and relevant stakeholders can be actively engaged in those discussions as a vital aspect of fostering global collaboration for bringing the change we want to see in ocean governance. In this context, the BBNJ agreement represents a benchmark not only for ocean governance, but also for other environmental agreements, as it recognizes other types of knowledge systems, such as traditional knowledge. There are several mentions of traditional knowledge along the text of the treaty, from general principles and approaches to Annex 1. Next, please. Taking the ABMT's package as an example, I'm going to highlight here the Article 19, which refers to the proposals of new areas that emphasize, the text of the article emphasizes the collaboration of relevant stakeholders, as well as the indigenous and local communities and the civil society for proposing new area-based management tools, including marine protected areas. Article 48, which refers to transparency, also highlights the importance of facilitating the participation and consultation of a wide range of bodies, including indigenous peoples and local communities in the implementation of the agreement. This commitment to inclusivity and collaboration provide evidence that the BBNJ agreement is dedicated to find holistic and sustainable solutions for ocean management. The Annex 1, which refers and outlines the criteria for the identification of areas, incorporated factors such as uniqueness, rarity, special importance for life history stage of species, ecological connectivity, cultural significance, and more. And in this case, traditional knowledge can represent a powerful tool, as it can provide the essential information to achieve those criteria for the identification of new areas. Promoting an inclusive and diverse environment will help to better shape solutions, giving voice and due representativeness for marginalized groups, and recognizing the importance of collective effort to achieve better goals. A healthy ocean is not just a responsibility or a benefit of a selected group. Rather, this is intrinsically related to the well-being of humankind as a whole. Next, please. While closely monitoring the negotiations, we have identified some challenges. For example, the states reaching consensus because they had different interests involved in the negotiations. We also observed that there were some discrepancies between the delegation in terms of size and variety of expertise of some countries. Additionally, our observations indicated that Westernized knowledge tends to be perceived as more reliable than other types of knowledge. And this is despite the fact that the BBNJ agreement recognizes, for example, traditional knowledge in the text. This dynamic has implications for the decision-making processes and underscores once again the need for a more inclusive and diverse representation of perspectives. Furthermore, despite the significance of the agreement, we had noted a concerning lack of awareness among individuals outside the BBNJ world, especially those in least developing countries where the access to resources are scarce. They are largely uninformed about the past negotiations and about the importance of the BBNJ agreement for a healthy ocean. I'll pass the floor now to Vanessa. Next slide, please. She is going to talk about some suggestions on how to move forward. I would like to acknowledge the DOSI for giving me the opportunity to be part of the delegation and also this webinar, and the Nippon Foundation Ocean Voices program for supporting the time for doing the analysis, and also Dr. Harriet Harden-Davis and Dr. Mario Vierros for providing insights and always supporting our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. Hello, hello everyone. My name is Vanessa Lopes. I am a marine biologist working on ocean science and policy, and a fellow at the Ocean Voices program and a member of the DOSI community. So today I will be adding some reflections to the overall process of the BBNJ, highlighting some opportunities and suggestions to some of the challenges that were just presented by Mariana. So first, I do see the BBNJ treaty as an opportunity for the global community to network. It is an opportunity to insert different narratives in the deep ocean community, to allow different voices, international communities, and to together tackle the challenges of the deep ocean. So it can also serve as a tool and legal framework to help achieve many sustainable development and conservation goals set by the international community, such, for example, as the UN Ocean Decade of Science and Sustainable Development Goals. In addition, the BBNJ Treaty shows the importance of science in policy, and this is reflected in all the different packages of the treaty. Unfortunately, as Mariana talked about and showed us, there was some lack of representation in some delegations. And some delegations do lack the pool of experts from various disciplines when compared to other delegations. And in areas of negotiation where, for example, is heavily reliant on science, such as MGR, developing countries delegations that have lower scientific capacity may have been at a disadvantage. There are other ways, there's so many ways though to support representation in negotiations, not only in BBNJ, but in general. And funding, for example, training do play an important role here. So lastly here, the treaty does recognize traditional knowledge, which is important to account for other types of knowledge in this treaty. I added this picture here, for example, to represent a specific moment at the last BBNJ negotiations, where a group of people from deep sea biologists to lawyers were just working together to provide technical support for delegations. And most of us in this picture were in the DOSI delegation, and this was one way that we could provide support within our professional expertise. And this is one way of participating and making sure your voice is being heard in the treaty. Regarding the challenges relating to scientific and technological capacity in SIDS, small island developing states, the capacity building and transfer marine technology and the marine genetic resources package do play an important role. One way of achieving capacity is through the sharing of benefits through the marine genetic resources package. For example, through scientific partnerships. These two packages of the agreement are connected and should be considered together as a whole. They're poised to tackle challenges faced by SIDS, such as resources when we're talking about equipment, training, infrastructure, access to data, needs assessment, funding, financial resources, and to monitoring and evaluation. Looking ahead, the work is just getting started, and there's so many opportunities going on and to be done. One way of achieving and retaining capacity is through partnerships. And we're talking about equitable and meaningful partnerships. And for example, the AOSIS Declaration of Marine Scientific Knowledge, Research Capacity, and Transfer Marine Technology to small developing states do highlight some ways that you can achieve equitable and meaningful partnerships. And this is just one example of the so many others that we can do. In addition, there are other ways and initiatives to support the ratification. There are some initiatives going on right now where technical, logistical, and legal support can be provided for developing countries or the Global South in general through network, workshops, etc. So it is important that the capacity of delegations are addressed also in future COPs to ensure that countries have the needed expertise in their groups and that all voices can be heard. So thank you so much to the Ocean Voices program for supporting us and to take part of the BBNJ process, NIPO Foundation and DOSI to also help us get there to the BBNJ process. Here's my email address, so please feel free to email me after this if you have any questions. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Brandon Gertz, DOSI's Director of Communications. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on the BBNJ Treaty. We have 4 more webinars planned in this anniversary series, so I hope we'll see you again. Next up is a webinar on the pollution pandemic in the deep ocean, which will highlight the work experts are doing to ensure an effective United Nations treaty on plastic pollution. That event will take place on January 17th at 3 p.m. UTC, and you can register at the link in the description below. Take care.